Tax Rep Network is brought to you by Bench, America's largest bookkeeping service for small businesses. Bench is committed to supporting business owners that have fallen seriously behind on their books, something that is all too common in representation work. They combine powerful technology and an in-house expert bookkeeping team to deliver accurate financials for every year of missing returns. Bench specializes in tough cases, solving even the most complex, difficult, and time-consuming client challenges. Working with Bench means more time for you to focus on actively working rep cases, problem solving, and growing your practice. What's more, they're fast, meaning you'll be keeping clients and revenue officers happy. It's a win-win. One of the greatest things I found is that if it's a really big, messy case, they can throw more and more people at it versus anyone I could find locally. Once Bench helps your clients fully catch up, their monthly bookkeeping service keeps them out of trouble, ensuring you can provide a truly lasting resolution. Bench's partner program is perfect for tax pros that need a dependable resource they can trust to get their clients caught up. With meaningful partner benefits and dedicated support, Bench already works with many tax rep members. Find out more at www.bench.co/taxrep. That's www.bench.co/taxrep. So how do I call the IRS and get through much faster? How do I avoid those courtesy hangups that the IRS does? I use Call ENQ. ENQ is a service that you can use to get through to the IRS much faster, get to a representative, and basically get your case resolved. We set up a special arrangement for Tax Rep Network listeners where you can try the service, get 200 minutes for $19.95. For less than $20, you get 200 minutes and you will save hours and hours and hours of time and frustration. Just go to callenq.com/TRN. Again, callenq.com/TRN as in Tax Rep Network. Try the service. It will literally change your practice. How do I manage my tax rep practice? How do I get transcripts? How do I track what is going on with the IRS with every single one of my client cases? How do we complete the offer forms, the powers of attorney, everything? We use Tax Help software. Tax Help software is the cornerstone of our practice. We use it for its intelligent ordering. Every single night, it will update the transcripts on our clients, so we will see things happen long before those letters even go to the mail. We can then, react. We can let the client know. We can get all the transcripts we need to determine what our client's best options are, when is the debt going to expire, and we can fill in all of the IRS forms and get them filed accurately, the analysis done correctly. If you're interested in giving it a test, go to taxhelpsoftware.com, use promo code TAXREPTRIAL, all one word, all caps. You will get a free 2-week trial. Again, that's taxhelpsoftware.com, TAXREPTRIAL, all caps for a free 2-week trial. If you love it and want to buy it, use TAXREP10, capital, all caps, TAXREP10, TAXREP10, all caps, one word. You'll save 10% on your purchase. It will be the engine that runs your tax rep practice, just like it's what we use for ours.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining us for the podcast. I am joined by normally one of my co/guest hosts, but I with all the news coming out now about the IRS and Congress, I thought it would just be great to have Gwen on. So I'm joined obviously by Gwen Moore from the Moore firm in Chicago. Gwen, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
And what prompted this is if you don't follow Gwen on LinkedIn and Facebook, you should, but she is a contributing columnist at Forbes. She did a terrific article, which what actually prompted this initially, mad at the IRS, blame Congress, not the commissioner, which I couldn't agree with more. And don't get me wrong, I do have a bone to pick with some of what the IRS does, and you and I both spend our lives fighting with the IRS. But I thought the article was really on point. And then, of course, today out comes Congress calls for the IRS collection changes amid backlog. So maybe we can get into some of that too. So the idea, Gwen, of don't blame the commissioner. By the way, I learned some stuff from your column that the IRS can't just simply take people and put them on the phones, that there's a set budget for this. Can you explain? Well, you know what? In fact, why don't you give the listeners kind of who are mostly, I believe, accountants and attorneys and probably already have a sense of what is going on with the IRS. But if you want to just paint the picture, and then let's get into your column, which I thought was just fascinating.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. And I really consider myself incredibly lucky to have an avenue like Forbes to vent, which has in many ways become what my contribution in Forbes. It's called IRS Watch, and they're a team of practitioners who write about what is happening with Treasury, with IRS, and how that impacts taxpayers. And one thing that always strikes me as just incredibly important whenever you're thinking about the Internal Revenue Service and dealing with the Internal Revenue Service, I think the first thing that we need to do is take a step back and put it into context. Unlike every other federal agency, the Internal Revenue Service is the one government agency that, number one, every adult U.S. person, whether you are a citizen, a non-citizen, whether you are a green card holder, whatever your relationship with the United States is, if you are an adult who lives here or who works here or who has income that is effectively connected with the IRS, you have a legal obligation to file a federal income tax return. So that's number one. You have a legal obligation to deal with the Internal Revenue Service. And number two, there are criminal penalties. You could go to prison if you don't meet those obligations or you don't meet them all the way. The one federal agency that has that level of an impact. And to think that year after year after year, this agency, which every American is charged with interacting with, in a complex area that is confounding to many people who are otherwise very smart. And yet, as a society, we have not demanded of our representatives that they adequately fund this agency. And that to me is incredibly problematic. So, Eric, much like you, I am very involved with the American Bar Association and other organizations such as, for example, NATP is a fantastic organization. I've gotten a lot of benefit from my affiliation with them, the Accounting and Financial Women's Alliance. So I find professional organizations for those of us who practice before the IRS to be incredibly important, both in terms of keeping up to date on the things that we need to know in order to do our jobs well, but also for networking and forming a group of colleagues who are going to be, number one, people to bounce ideas off of, and number two, people who you can both refer work to when there's something that doesn't fall into your wheelhouse, and hopefully will refer work to you. So the first time that I heard the commissioner speak after he became the commissioner was at an American Bar Association event. And he talked about his vision for how things were going to grow. And of course, I had known him when we were colleagues in private practice. And it's always really fantastic to see somebody who you know in a role that is so important like this. So that was an interesting thing. And I've seen him speak many times. And I can't remember when it was, but it was sometime within the last year or two, I heard the commissioner talk about how the budget restricts what they are able to do. And by that, I mean, Congress has allocated money for the Internal Revenue Service, but it's put into specific buckets. And because Congress has made those allocations, no one can change them without authorization of Congress. And the first time I heard Chuck talk about this, he was talking in particular about telephone service and telephone operators, and that there's a certain amount of money that is allocated to telephone service. And then in my role as a Forbes columnist, I thought, well, this is something that's incredibly interesting and I would like to know more about and write an article about. And I started researching it and found that what he said was correct. Not that I would have doubted, right? But check, but trust, but verify. And then didn't end up writing the column because, as you all listening to this know, in this line of work, our academic pursuits are lovely, but client work comes first. And so I got sidetracked and started working on client work and didn't get back to it. So it was through a speech that Chuck gave where I learned that there are certain buckets where money goes that can't be moved, and also through a speech that he gave when I first learned that I had no idea that apparently when a disaster hits in this country, a switch flips at the IRS, and the people who you are calling when you're calling FEMA to say, I need emergency housing, those are IRS employees who are answering the FEMA line. And those two facts, I think, are incredibly important for putting the current crisis that we're facing when it comes to IRS service into perspective. And I always am careful to use analogies that oversimplify because I think you get in trouble that way. But I'm going to do it here and say it is the same as if, I give, say I'm 17 years old and my mother gives me $50 and says, please go to the grocery store and get milk, eggs, bread, and chicken and bring home the change. And on the way to the grocery store, I noticed that the car is on empty. Now I'm a person who understands that the car isn't going to make it to the grocery store and back if it's on empty, and I'm passing a gas station on the way. Now she's given me $50 and she's told me what I'm allowed to buy with it. And she hasn't said I'm allowed to buy gas. Essentially what the way that the budget works is the commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, who is vested with not only the authority, but the responsibility of collecting the revenue for this country, does not have the authority to stop and get gas. Right. He sees that the amount of telephone volume has increased by hundreds of percents, and yet he cannot take people off of Project A and put them on the phone because that bucket is specifically allocated. And that is infuriating, Eric, I think, for all of us and the commissioner. And that's what prompted me, after I sat on hold 4 hours and finally reached an agent. And I said, this is absurd. And you know what? I can't be mad at this agent who I talked to, who's fantastic and was great. And I can't be mad at the commissioner. You know who I'm mad at? I'm mad at Congress, because Congress has chosen not to fund the IRS, and equally as importantly, not to create a fund that gives the commissioner authority to, in his discretion, move money where the commissioner can see that it's needed.
No, I agree. And on the one hand, when COVID started, I actually thought, and by the way, I think there's a silver lining to this. Do you remember, Gwen, or did you have the, I'm sure you did, but I'm going to say, do you remember, like 3 years ago, I would say, look, can we just I don't want to drive into New York to meet with the appeals officer, and I don't want to be on the phone. Can we get on a Zoom? No, we don't do that. Can I send you a memory stick with the documents instead of 5 bankers boxes? No, we don't do that. COVID has changed all that. I actually just had a fast track mediation, which I'm actually going to do a podcast on. It was fantastic. We were all on Zoom. The examiners were there, and we got what we wanted. We dealt with the senior manager for the audit group. 2 hours resolved, and it was terrific. That would not have happened 3 years ago.
We are very lucky because in many ways, e-signatures on POAs.
Yeah. And listen, with e-fax and everything else, I've done podcasts on this. Have laptop will travel. You're in Chicago. One of my wife's best friends lives in Chicago. I could pick this up, and I've done this before. I can go to Gwen's office downtown and work like I'm working in my office. I could. All right, I'll bring you the bourbon. So I no, the in other words, and by the way, it's difficult to find folks. Well, the problem because now my clients have gotten used to not coming in a meeting with me. We do everything over the web, right? WebEx or Zoom or whatever. I now have a talent pool all over the country, to the point where we're talking about, why would I want to go in good way? Why do I want to go try to find someone who has experience? I have colleagues all over the country. Can someone of counsel and come in and help us on a project, who we can pay? So in many ways, I think the virus accelerated some very good changes, but it's also exposed a lot of problems. And with people struggling, so many people now have to call the government. It would be great if, and in a way, will this force, the automated callback? Can I log in and set up an appointment and do a Zoom with somebody at the IRS? Will I be able to say, hey, my problem is an amended return? I could be directed to someone and get an appointment, just like I can book up an appointment with anyone else online. So just so the audience knows, security is a massive problem for the government. And what most people don't realize is there are 1 million attempted hacks a day on the IRS system. So the IRS is in the midst of a cyber war 24/7. With that going on, they are now trying to do more. I've been on them for years, Paul Mamo and everyone. Why can't I just have Dropbox? Why are you mailing me stacks of notices? Just drop them in electronically and send me an email. You've got mail, basically, and I can log in and get them. I told them, unless you're trying to just keep the post office afloat, why are you, this is millions and millions of dollars. The problem is security. How do they keep that secure if they're dropping client notices into a mail system, knowing that there are hackers hitting them 1 million times a day trying to get through? So the government's is in a very tough position, but certainly tying their hands behind their back as far as the ability to put resources where it's needed. I mean, one of the benefits of our firm, your firm, my firm's probably a little bit bigger. Our litigators had a huge commercial litigation going on 4 or 5 months ago. We could say, you can have all the support staff for the next 3 days. We could throw them at that and get through it. Getting all these exhibits and everything else they needed done. Can you imagine being told, yeah, you can't do that? Most people are not allowed to be allocated there.
Right. That's exactly right. It is incredible to me that you and I both know, Eric, there are 1 million references in the US code that delegate to the secretary the authority to interpret various statutes. So for example, 6111 talks about tax shelters and the penalties associated with that. Congress knew and understood that its appropriate role is not to sit and think about every potential tax shelter that there could be. And they didn't try to define what a tax shelter is. Instead, they delegate to the Treasury Secretary the authority to pass regulations that will set forth what a tax shelter is, right? And then so on and so forth. And then the commissioner enforces it. So Congress knows and understands how to delegate to the agencies important tools for carrying out the congressional purpose of the legislation that Congress passes. And there's no way that we can effectively run the IRS if the commissioner doesn't have the authority to put more money in a bucket that the commissioner can very clearly see. This is where we need more boots on the ground. We need boots on the ground. We need people answering the phone. We need people opening the mail. I mean, so from my perspective, as a tax controversy attorney, and I'm not a preparer, and I know, Eric, that the preparers are getting it even worse than I am. So first and foremost, let me acknowledge that, and let me say, for those of you preparers who are listening, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, like, Guinevere, I have the smallest violin in the world for you about how the mail that you're sending in is not getting opened. I know that it's worse for all of you, but the problem is the same, and it is that mail isn't being opened, and it isn't being processed, and it's just not. Sorry, my phone is ringing. It's just not. It's not okay. I mean, we have clients who are getting notices that are incorrect.
Yep.
Clients who are sending in a response to a communication, and instead of the IRS opening, reading, acknowledging the response, they are sending a collection notice. And that gets us to the news from today. Yep. So something has to give, and somebody needs to turn off the button that puts people in collections and send these collection notices out. You know, the thing, Eric, that I'm seeing over and over and over, what I'm seeing right now a ton of are penalties under 6722, which are information reporting penalties for businesses that hired payroll services to handle their payroll. And for whatever reason, those businesses did not do the Obamacare forms. The form that says we are complying with Obamacare for each employee. Yep. So now under, I think it's 1094C, people are getting these notices, and out of the CAR unit, it's like you go from 0 to 100. Yep. First, they send the notice, and whoever gets it isn't reading it, or whatever is happening that's supposed to happen is not happening. And the next thing you know, it's an assessable penalty. The IRS has determined this is intentional disregard, and what should have been like a $10,000 penalty that could have been resolved in one letter, all of a sudden is a $550,000 penalty that has been assessed. And now you're in collections. Yep. And nobody is even reading the response that I sent that said, hey, we hired a payroll company. They didn't do it properly. We didn't know about this form. We put controls in place to learn about what our obligations are. We're sorry we got it wrong. Here are the forms now. And no one's reading any of that, but Levy.
So, one of the problems, and it's not just recent, is you get this, and let's say you file your appeal. You appeal it, right? And you submit all your documentation. Collection continues. The appeal of a penalty does not stop collection. So the other thing we're seeing tons of, Gwen, is 3520 penalties. So for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, there's a form 3520 that you're supposed to file if you inherit money from an offshore estate or an offshore trust, which it's an information return. There's no tax due, right? You're inheriting, so there's nothing due. The penalty is up to 35% of what you got. So I have somebody who inherited money. There is a London-based CPA firm and a London-based law firm took care of all the filings, everything in London. Told him there's no tax due, and so he doesn't file the 3520. And got a bill for $1.2 million that we're fighting. So we filed the appeal. Meanwhile, He's in collection. They're moving to suspend his passport. So I actually have a funny story about this. So Gwen, in June, I think June 15th was a Tuesday, I think. On Thursday, I have Darren Guillot, SBSC Commissioner for Enforcement, on the podcast, and we're recording. And I said to him, was it the podcast? No, it was NYU. We were recording for NYU, the NYU Tax Controversy Forum. And I said to Darren, I'm like, Darren, come on. I got 4 kids to put through college. When are you guys going to start enforcing again? He said, oh, yeah, June 15th. I was like, excuse me? I figured he'd say, well, Eric, we're looking at it, COVID, whatever. He's like, oh, yeah, no. We got the green light. June 15th, we flipped the switch. And so I end up talking to Roger Nemeth. Now, Roger has tax help software. We use it for our transcripts. We use it for all of our, offers and stuff. It's the best software ever. And so I'm talking to Roger, and I said, Darren says June 15th. Roger goes and posts it on Facebook. Spoke to Eric Green, who heard it from Darren. June 15th, enforcement starts, like buckle your seatbelts or something like that. On Monday, Darren calls, has me interrupted and pulled out of a meeting. Tell Roger to take it down. Tell Roger to take what down? He posted on Facebook. I said, Darren, you told me this was good. I mean, we could take it down, but we can't take it back. And he said, we never briefed Congress. They can't find out from Facebook. All right. So I called Roger. Roger takes it down. 4:00 Monday, I get another call from Darren. I'm in a meeting, but my assistant came in and just opened the door and said, Darren said that June 15th is a go. Congress said it's okay. So June 15th, now the automated levy action starts again and the lien notices. January 3rd, Darren and I are doing a talk for the Seattle Tax Symposium. January 3rd, trust fund assessments now go out. And so what we're finding, though, and there's a point to this, is in fact, in many ways, it's forcing me to make the problem worse. So what's happening is clients have filed, paper filed 17, 18, 19, and, and like on 18, 19, they had refunds, they applied over to 20. No one's opened the mail. No one's processed them. 20 now has a balance because they don't know about the overpayments. They've now sent threat to levy. So what are we doing with this? I'm filing doubt as to liability offers to stop it. I'm doing a 656L. I'm attaching the returns, the amended returns, whatever, and I'm mailing it in. That'll stop collection. But in a way, I recognize what I'm doing is almost making it worse, because now there's a package that's taking up the queue to get to an examiner to review. I mean, here's my thought. My hope is, when I'm telling clients, we're going to file this, by the time, because it can take up to a year or more before that even gets looked at, it'll stop enforcement. By the time it gets looked at, hopefully they'll have processed your returns. The balance will go away. They'll call and say, can you fax over a withdrawal? And, they don't owe anything or whatever. But I usually file 6, 8 doubt as to liabilities offers a year, usually to challenge a trust fund assessment when they've blown their ability to protest and they can't afford to litigate and refund litigate. I must have filed 50 doubt as to liability offers last year.
Eric, you bring up such a great point. I think let's take a minute and talk about the difference between assessable penalties and deficiency penalties. I think that's a really important difference that we should talk about for the listeners. In general, when a taxpayer has a dispute with the IRS, and you're talking about adjustments to a tax return that the taxpayer has filed, when you have a revenue agent assigned and there's an IRS examination, if the IRS and the taxpayer don't reach an agreement, what happens is the IRS will issue a notice of deficiency. A notice of deficiency is called the ticket to tax court. This is what the taxpayer uses to go to tax court. You have 90 days from the date the notice is issued to file a tax court petition, 150 if you're outside the United States. And tax court, importantly, is the only prepayment venue available for taxpayers to litigate disputes with the Internal Revenue Service. So the IRS says you filed a tax return that said you owed 20 grand in tax. We've reviewed this return. We've examined it. We think an adjustment needs to be made. We think you owe 250,000 in tax. We are proposing this deficiency. You file a tax court petition. The taxpayer is not required to pay a penny. Of course, they can make a deposit if they want to stop interest from accruing, but they're not required to. And the tax court will take jurisdiction as long as the petition is timely filed. And the taxpayer has an opportunity for his or her day in court prior to paying anything. And the assessment itself, the IRS is statutorily prohibited from making any assessment until after such time as the tax court makes a determination, and that is final. Conversely, if we're talking about assessable penalties, this is the 3520, 3520A, 5471, 8865, 6722. We're talking about the information reporting penalties where your W-2 is incorrect, your W-2C is incorrect, were you missing the Obamacare forms? Those are assessable penalties. What that means is as soon as IRS exam determines that those penalties should be assessed, they are assessed. The taxpayer does not receive a notice of deficiency. There is no ticket to tax court. At that point, taxpayers have a choice. Your choices are as follows. Number one, you have to pay it in full, file a claim for refund, wait 6 months, and then you can litigate either in United States District Court or the Court of Federal Claims. That is not a desirable outcome. And it's not desirable because number one, it's more expensive to litigate in United States District Court or Court of Federal Claims than it is to litigate in tax court. Tax court, by comparison, is much more streamlined and inexpensive place to litigate. And number two, the price of admission is paying the entire amount of the penalty. The only other way that a taxpayer can obtain judicial review for an assessable penalty is to pay the amount, to what I say to my clients, the nail biter. You have to literally bite your nails and hold your breath and wait for something to work its way through to collections. Once it works its way through to collections, there are three things that we know are eventually going to happen that are going to give you the right to a collection due process appeal. One, a final notice of lien being filed. Two, a final notice of intent to levy. Or three, a notice of seizure. So for example, a state refund has been seized and applied. Those three things give you the right to a collections due process appeal. Once you file your collections due process appeal, you can possibly dispute liability. If liability is properly at issue in your collections due process appeal hearing, then if you disagree with the settlement officer in the collections due process appeal hearing and they issue a notice of determination, you have 30 days from the date of that notice to file a tax court petition and then dispute liability in tax court. But there's a case called United States v. Perkins, which says that you can only dispute liability, and this is based on the language in 6330 and 6320, if you have not had a prior opportunity for a hearing, for review. So what does that prior opportunity mean? Perkins says that can be a prior appeals conference. So for example, if you have a client who says, listen, if I get a lien against me, I'm dead in the water, my business is going to be shut down, and you file a cap for them, that's the appeals hearing. So then when you do CDP, liability is not at issue. And what's especially troubling about this, Eric, is that it's not within the taxpayer's power to determine which comes first, possibility for an appeals hearing comes first. And interestingly, If you look at the purple book of the National Taxpayer Advocates recommendations for legislative changes,
Yep.
this is on the list. This is on the list that NTA has recommended that 6320 and 6330 be amended to make clear that a prior hearing should be judicial review.
Right.
Sorry,
Right,
I
no.
just had a soapbox there.
No, I mean, it's true, because what happens a lot in collection cases is just that you really can't raise at CDP the underlying liability unless you haven't had an opportunity before. And that usually means that you never got a notice of deficiency. So people, and we see a lot of this. They had a tax preparer who's not enrolled. They got these audit adjustments. Nothing happens. Or maybe they submitted documentation. No one looks at it, right? NOD comes out, notice of deficiency. The unenrolled preparer says, I'll deal with it. They're calling the IRS thinking that they can somehow explain this and get it fixed. You and I both know that's not happening. 90 days comes and goes. Now it's final. So now you go up on CDP and they can present information, whether it is the lien or the levy notice, and the settlement officers say, I'm very sorry, I can't consider it. You've already had a prior opportunity to challenge, and you were relying on your tax preparer who said, don't worry, I'll deal with it, who couldn't deal with it.
And you know what, Eric, it's really, first of all, I strongly agree with and support the NTA's suggestion that 6330 and 6320 be amended to make clear that a prior opportunity for hearing should be judicial hearing and not in appeals. Because the other thing, as you and I both know, going up against, for example, on 3520, it's a coordinated issue. Appeals has determined that liability for the failure to file these information reporting reforms is going to be treated a certain way. It's a coordinated issue. You're not getting the kind of facts and circumstances analysis that you should be getting. And it's a predetermined thing. They're deciding in favor of exam. So should that count as your hearing? I don't think so.
Nope. No, and it's really an abuse. That you inherit money. There's no tax due. There's no, how many accountants know about what a Form 3520 is and that you have to file it? How many taxpayers will tell their accountant, I inherited some money, and usually I bet most of the accountants like, well, yeah, but there's no tax due for that. And they blow right past it.
Right. I inherited money from my father.
Yeah.
Could be a true statement, right? Yep. 100% sure. I inherited money from my father. Oh, well, the accountant doesn't think to say, is your father a non-US person? And if so, then that's going to be not taxable to you, but a form that you have to file. And by the way, if we don't fill out that form, the penalty is insane.
Yep. Nope. 35% is nuts. But anyway, so to get, so Congress, bipartisan committee made a bunch of recommendations, some of which I think are good, some of which seem a little weird. Halting automated collections until a minimum of 90 days after the April deadline for most Americans to file the 2021 returns. I kind of get that. I think there are some older debts that they shouldn't have to hold off on, but okay. Delaying the collection process for filers until any active and pending penalty abatement requests have been processed.
I strongly support that one.
Well, I do, except that it's taking them over a year and a half often with these penalty abatement requests. So
that's what caused me to write the article. Was I was calling because my client got penalties assessed for these Obamacare forms, the 1094C.
Yep.
Filed a penalty abatement request in August of 2021. Nobody has even looked at it yet. And now we're in collections. And I agree, collection process should be on hold until someone looks at this.
Well, I agree. And especially if if they would combine it with one of the other suggestions was to streamline the penalty abatement process. And so if you can streamline the penalty abatement process, and because of that, hold off on collections, I agree with that. Providing targeted tax penalty relief for taxpayers who paid at least 70% of the taxes due for the 2020 and 2021 tax year. Expediting processing of amended returns and providing TAS and congressional caseworkers timely response. Well, certainly processing any paper return would be great. What do they have left? Like 6.5 million that they haven't processed. It's and that's before tax season starts. It's insanity.
You know what else I think would go a long way? Eric is talking about how, do you remember years ago the law was changed to say that if the IRS didn't give you an answer on an OIC in 2 years, then it's automatically accepted. I think the same should be true for penalty abatement requests. If you don't get an answer in 2 years, it should be accepted.
I would get behind that.
I mean, 2 years is a long time for a taxpayer to wait for an answer from an agency that they are statutorily obligated to deal with.
Yeah, my 1094, my Obamacare penalty case, which is $550,000. We've now been waiting for a little over a year and have not heard back on our appeal. Now, as it turns out, because you and I do what we do, I managed to talk to the revenue officer and the territory manager, and they shelved the collection case for me. So I managed to at least stop the collection aspect, but we're still waiting over a year. And if it's just crazy, it really is, and it's very frustrating for taxpayers. And I don't know, have you seen this? We've started getting phone calls. Folks that filed for refunds in October, right? Filed the 2020 return October 15th, e-filed, can't get their refunds.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That they got a letter that it was being looked at. They got another letter saying that it's been approved. And now 60, 75 days later, there's no refund. And if you call, they just simply say, well, it's being processed. How long does it take to process?
Yeah,
I'm the IRS right now is a bit of a disaster. And but to get back to this, you have two problems. One, of course, is willingness to fund the government properly. But the other thing, honestly, is actually getting people to come in, do the job, and training them, which is a real problem. COVID continues. So I did a podcast where what I was telling people, I get a lot of this. They're up on appeal. They've lost an appeal, and they want me to take the case to tax court. Okay, we go through the case, and what happens is they filed something with appeals, but didn't give them the backup. And when I asked them, well, why didn't you send them well, we already gave the auditor that. That's their problem. Actually, it's not their problem. I said, here's what's happening. This appeals officer is working at home. They don't have the file. And so the gist of the podcast was, your job is to make their job agreeing with you easy. So for instance, here's the issue. We provided this already to the auditor, but here's a set of backup for you so you can see it. And here's this, and here's this. Make their job easy to agree with you. And the point being is that it was always hard even before, but they could at least get the file. They're now working from home. They can't get the file. And if you think that they're going to be motivated enough to try to order the file, get into the office, get the file, they're overwhelmed. I'm sure morale is at an all-time low right now. It's a real problem. So getting new people in and training them, I guess remotely, I'm not even sure how that works.
Yeah. So,
It's
yeah, and Eric, like, this is something that's affecting us in every single way of dealing with the IRS. I'm sure you have the same in your firm's standard operating procedure. When I take on a new client, I, of course, research that client internally. We file a POA with the IRS. I go 5 years back, at least, from when the client tells me the problem first started. And we do a FOIA. We do a FOIA for every last client.
Yep.
And what I'm getting now, the first thing I get is a call from the FOIA department asking me to withdraw my FOIA because nobody has time to look at it and resubmit it in 6 months. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. So then what do I get? I get a series of 3 letters, all asking for extensions, not asking, telling me they're taking extensions on doing the FOIA request. So
Yep.
so now I can't give the information. I've got my hand tied behind my back because I don't know from the IRS's perspective, what do they think about this taxpayer? It's just a domino effect.
Yep.
And they don't have the people in the FOIA department. They don't have them in any department.
Yep. No. Listen, the CAF unit.
Yeah.
Getting a power of attorney on. And yes, we can use the electronic submission. So by the way, Gwen, so here's the trick. And Roger Nemeth from Tax Help Software told me this. We'll call up practitioner priority or even ACS, fax over the power of attorney, ask them. Now they won't fax the transcripts anymore, but we ask them to load them into the e-services mailbox, and then we can log in with the software and pull them. And so we can still get transcripts and all of that, pull our transcript report, without having to wait 30 days and 45 days and whatever. But it is, in many ways, I know there's always, Chuck, and God bless him, has always been sort of big on enforcement. I think they need to do a little less in the enforcement and way more in the client support, the CAF unit, the FOIA unit, just processing the paper, answering the phones. If they can keep building out the technology, I could live with having an appointment. If I could go, like I said, if I could log on and set up a phone appointment for, next Tuesday at 3 p.m. or whatever, I'm okay with that. I understand I may not, there might be times I have to wait and get instant access. And how long were you on the hold? 4 hours?
Yeah.
No, it's, I think that right now it would be good for Congress to make sure they have the funding. Whether they can hire the people or not is going to be interesting.
It will be very interesting. But speaking of hiring,
yes,
Eric, as you know, so we've got on the one hand, IRS is saying we need more funds. Funding is desperate. I get myself all worked up and write this plea and say, Congress, please fund the IRS. And these customer service issues are not the fault of the IRS. They're not the fault of the commissioner. We need more funding for the IRS. And then what do we see? A press release that IRS is hiring 200 new counsel attorneys to go after tax shelters. And, Eric, I saw that and I thought, read the room, people. Yep. This is not what the American people want to see right now. What the American people want to see is that money is being invested in customer service, in line level people to answer the phones, line level people to open the mail. And I understand, I personally disagree, and I'm doing everything in my power to fight the position that the service is taking on certain things that the service thinks is abusive. But hiring 200 new counsel attorneys right now, when there is a literal fire on the phones, to my mind, is very tone deaf.
I agree. And like I said, I mentioned, I'm all in favor. I mean, look, if they get 200 more counsel to go after, shelters, tax shelters, for you and I, it's great, right? There'll be way more litigation about this, way more enforcement. But overall,
Went through college. I mean, great.
no. But overall, is that the number one priority right now for the government, especially what they're going to be paying the council people? They could get 400 more frontline workers to open the mail and process the paper.
I bet you 600. Yeah. That's such a great point, Eric. That's such a great point. And I understand that money comes from different buckets, right? You've got your council, you've got your IRS, but unfortunately for me, I'm not the queen of the universe, right? I don't get to decide things, but I really bristled when I saw that. And I thought, this is not, of course, it is definitely the Gwen Moore and Eric Green Full Employment Act of 2022, right? But as a taxpayer, I got mad when I read that. And you know what, Eric, actually hearing myself say that out loud made me really think about, there are many times in my job where as a taxpayer, I'm mad about the way that the IRS goes about things because I see my money being wasted. But to the point that you made at the top of the discussion, in many ways, the silver lining of COVID has really improved, streamlined, and I think cut costs from a taxpayer's perspective. The fact that we can do appeals conferences over WebEx is a cost savings to taxpayers. And I'm grateful for
So one of my former partners left and went to IRS chief counsel in San Francisco. She has been working from her home in New York.
Wow.
Well, so think about this. If the tax court basically did hearings over Zoom, and if you needed to go to trial, they could schedule that. If you're IRS, do you need to have chief counsel's offices in every single city? Could you not have that centralized and have, quite honestly, if you need to have a trial in San Francisco, if there's counsel who live out there, great. If not, people can fly out for the twice a year that they have to have a calendar and do the trial. I'm wondering if this won't allow the government, now that we can do way more through WebEx or whatever, to to me, what was the problem with appeals offices when they're closing them is I can't get to an appeal. Now everything's over the phone. What if I have to show them documents or want to show them documents? Can you just shrink your footprint? And with this, if people need to travel, let them travel for that particular whatever it is. But I bet the savings to the government and the taxpayers would be huge if we can get Dropbox and stop sending 55 million pieces of mail, which are reminder notices of balances.
And let's talk about, Eric, how many different ways that comes into play, okay? Yep. Because we're talking about their response to FOIA, right? Because when you do a FOIA, whoever's working on the file has to package it up and send it to FOIA. And then they have to go through and look at it, and then they package it up and they send it back to whoever's working on it. So we're talking about that. We're talking about exam packaging it up and sending it to appeals packaging up and sending it to counsel. I mean, these are the things that times a million can really make an impact, and not to mention the environmental impact.
Right. No, absolutely. So crazy times.
Yes, crazy but fun. I keep thinking that this is a very exciting time to be working in tax controversy. We're seeing a lot of changes every day, things that I think would have taken 20 years to took place overnight, like the e-signatures on the POAs. To be clear, I am not excited about the idea of taking a selfie to get on to e-services and get my transcripts. And I hope that the ACLU is successful in fighting that. I've read that the ACLU is going to fight it. And I hope that doesn't happen. But some of these other technological advances I'm really excited about. And I'm also, we're seeing the Office of Fraud Enforcement, I think, is just making really great headway and doing exciting things that is leading to very fun and interesting cases for us. And I was really pleased to see the NTA's recommendations for legislative change. I hope that some of those come to fruition, and it's a great time to be in this business.
Yeah, no. And I mean, look, as far as 15 years ago, there was no international enforcement on penalties. And the breadth of my practice has gotten way larger than I ever thought it would. No, and there are aspects of it that are very cool, but there is this ongoing frustration, especially for people that don't want to hire, no offense, Gwen Moore and Eric Green, to have to, you shouldn't have to bring in tax lawyers to figure out where your refund is.
100%. And not only that, but like, if somebody were to call me for that, I would say, this is not, no, because it's not, I'm super upfront, Eric, and I know you are too. Whenever people call me about what I'm uniquely qualified to do and what I'm not uniquely qualified to do, and if it's something like, where's my refund? I am not the right person for you, because I'm expensive and that's not what I do every day. So I'm not very good at it.
Right.
You're much better off with your CPA.
Yep.
But that brings me to another point, which I think anybody who practices before the IRS, and all of your listeners out there, the best thing that we can ever do for ourselves and our clients is to be really honest with ourselves and our clients about what we are and are not uniquely qualified to do, right? Because if you get to the point and you're like, man, I should really hand this off to an accountant. I've done what I should. I've gotten the right result in court. I'm here. And now this is time for me to hand it off to an accountant. This person does not need a lawyer anymore, and vice versa, right? The accountant should be like, okay, well, this is probably the time to get a lawyer involved. And it takes that honesty with yourself and with your client about who's the best suited to do the job in front of you.
Agreed. Absolutely. All right. So, Gwen, thank you for taking the time to do this. I know we have a criminal tax program coming up shortly.
Yes. I can't wait to talk about that and all the fun things that I'm seeing right now coming out of CI. And we've got some fun things in store in Chicago, hopefully in October for your listeners. Teaming up with CI to do some fun hands-on type of things. So look forward to talking to you about that next week.
Very cool. All right, listen, and everyone listening, thank you for listening in again. And Gwen, thank you. Have a great weekend. And if you're in the Northeast, stay safe, because we're going to have crazy weather for the next couple of days.
All right. Thank you so much, Eric.
All right. Take care.